Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on a page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Rosemary Brandenburg, SDSA, and today I'm pleased to have set decorator Philippa Hart and production designer Christina Moore joining me to discuss their collaboration on the Amazon series, A Very British Scandal. Philippa and Christina, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Yes, so exciting. This project is one of the most beautiful things I've seen in a long time. It's just gorgeously realized. Thank you and congratulations, because I'm not the only one who really liked it, to your win at the British Film Design Guild in the category of independent television drama.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a tale of a train wreck of a marriage. It's addictively fascinating. Set in the 1950s and 1960s. Primarily in London and Scotland, with forays to Paris and Biarritz. Ian and Margaret were deliciously horrible, beautifully portrayed by Claire Foy and Paul Bettany. But before we get into the sets, could you please give us both some background on your paths to where you are now? Christina, could you start off?
Yes, I trained initially as an architect and I worked for a few years in that capacity, but my passion had always been for storytelling. I used to do a lot of theatre design as a student, and when I was made redundant from my last job as an architect, I found that I was actually thrilled, which wasn't a good sign, and I enrolled at film school, the National Film School just outside London, and trained as a production designer, and found that really it suited me much better. The discipline is not that different to being an architect. I think it requires a lot of the same skills, but I could indulge my passion for storytelling and I didn't need to have an attention span that would last several years on a project. And I was very fortunate that on my first professional project, when I left film school, I was working as a storyboard artist on the Ang Lee film Sense and Sensibility, which was an amazing inauguration into the film industry. And there I met Philippa, who was also on her first film job, and we've been good friends and occasional collaborators since then. And I worked my way up through the art department as an art director, supervising art director for a number of years, most recently on Game of Thrones, which I worked on for 5 seasons. And in between times, I was always doing smaller jobs as a production designer. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been concentrating on production design. And I realized that although I have a big love of set building from my time as an architect, I suppose I actually love working on location and finding what that adds to the story and how it sends you in unexpected directions.
Oh, that's lovely. Let us know, Philippa, what your journey's been in a general swath.
Well, my journey was different in the sense I didn't go to film school. I studied art history at university, and when I left, I went into the art world. And then I worked for Lord Rothschild at Spencer House for about 7 years, restoring and overviewing the furnishing program, the committee. I was just there to sort of administer it, but I learned a lot in that time. And as a result of that experience, Luciana Righi, who was designing Sense and Sensibility, took me on as an assistant set dresser, standby art director. So that was my route into film. And from then, my journey was through set decoration. And I worked on various projects with Christina. But I have everything to thank to Luciana in the sense that she introduced me to the film industry. And I haven't looked back. And that was 27 years ago.
You also, Philippa, have an interior design company, right? Do you alternate between that and?
I started that really when I had children, and yes, when there were sort of fallow periods, yes, I would do a bit of interior design, which I do. and it supplements. But I drop that when I get a project. Film is more important to me. But it's a way, when you have children, film is difficult.
Is demanding. It is
It's demanding.
Punishing, right? So you guys have really done quite a few projects together by this point, right? You did Summerland in 2020.
We've worked together, I think, in the early days when we were both working with Luciana, we worked together, and then we worked together on a film about Francis Bacon, which was 20 odd years ago, and which was an incredibly interesting, very different experience. It was incredibly creative and challenging in very different ways. We had no money, we had to make a lot of things, but it was a great creative collaboration with a tiny group of people. And I think after that, we didn't work together for a while, did we, Philippa? But we've been friends over the years. So I think when I started designing again, we started working together again on Summerland, which was a lovely period film set during the war. And we've been working together on a contemporary film more recently, and just starting on a new project, still to be revealed, I suppose. Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah. It sounds like you're developing quite a collaboration together, which is such a value. Getting to this project, it's quite something. Did you have much collaboration with Sarah Phelps, the writer creator of the job?
Well, actually, we didn't really have any collaboration with her at all, which was quite strange. Obviously, we had the wonderful script, which is our Bible, and we had the whole story. We knew the time frame. We knew what the key locations were going to be. A few of them were cut. So I think in terms of collaborating with her, I had that, and her script was quite descriptive in terms of the atmosphere and things that she saw in the different places. So in fact, I met her for the first time on Zoom on one of these things quite recently, but I'd never met her before that. So I think it was partly because we were making this, during lockdown. And I think normally she probably would have loved to come on set, but most people were working remotely unless they had to be on set.
Have either of you worked with the director, Anne Sawicki, before?
We hadn't worked with her before. I met her again on Zoom, and she's a very visual director. So she was obviously very interested in what we were doing, but we all had quite a kind of condensed pre-production period. So I think it meant that she had to concentrate on working with the actors and working with Sarah on revisions to the script, and couldn't spend the time with the art department that she would have liked to.
Well, Philippa, Christina just mentioned a compressed preparation time. How did that impact you, having a short prep?
We had 1 week of technical recce's, then it was Easter weekend, and we literally had 4 days, and then we were going to Scotland to get it ready for the crew, and then back to London to even start on the London project. There was a lot to do. It was for a period production of that length, it was extraordinary to have such a short preparation time, but it happens, and everyone works hard and they pull it off.
So your locations were quite spread apart. You had London, you had Scotland. How many other, you had a couple of castles, I understand, actually stood in for Inveraray, is that right?
When I first started looking for locations, I had assumed, because of the subject matter, that the current Duke and Duchess of Argyll wouldn't be very keen for us to use the castle, but far from it. They were actually very sort of entertained by it, and they were really helpful. So although we did a search for a castle that could stand in for both the interior and the exterior, we ended up thinking we would gain so much by using the real castle for the exterior. But obviously our story is about restoring a dilapidated castle, and what we see today, what you see in these photographs, is absolutely not that. Not only had it already been restored by Margaret, but there had then been a fire, and quite a lot of the interiors were more modern inside, and it certainly didn't have the kind of romantic layering that we needed for our story. So we used this for the exterior, and we added a few sort of minimal bits and played with the two different faces of the castle, one which did lend itself to being a bit more run down in appearance, as you can see in these drawings. And then the other side, which faced onto the gardens, where we could use for the kind of reveal of the beautiful finished restoration project. And then for the interiors, we did use one other castle which was nearby, which was of a very different period, but it had a very similar landscape through the windows and beautiful interiors. So we used some of those, but most of it we shot in this pretty derelict boarding school outside Oxford, which was very, very challenging, partly because the architecture was very different and we had to disguise windows and things, but partly from Philippa's point of view, because it was completely empty. And we had very little time to do a version of it which looked dilapidated. And then pretty much overnight, we had to then produce a version of it which looked fully restored, because inevitably in the schedule, there wasn't time to go away to another location with a crew and then come back to the castle and give the art department the week or so that we wanted to make that change. So it was definitely, this was our biggest challenge, really, was doing this particular location. And also because our entire props team got COVID, so had to be removed from the project the first day we started set dressing. So we had a completely new team, most of whom had never worked as prop men before. So it was they were lovely, but Philippa was definitely hands-on, managing it all. It was quite challenging.
Wow, Philippa, this sounds like one of the more challenging experiences of a set decorator's career. So how did you go about replacing them? You just called around and found some hardy chaps?
Yes, exactly. Production, runners were ringing friends. It was quite something. But, everyone, that's the amazing thing about film, is that hands-on deck thing, and people just pull together somehow. Yes. And they did a brilliant job, they really did.
Well, of course, it's all in your planning that made that possible. Christina, the color palettes on this film are just striking. I imagine you and Philippa worked very closely on that. There's so many fabulous textiles and wall coverings and furnishings and upholstery. One thing that must have informed your choices was making sure the viewer understood where they were at all times, because there's lots of cutting back and forth between these places.
Well, it's interesting because we didn't have very much time to research this, but fortunately, I think because Philippa and I have a shorthand, and I know that Philippa, she's impeccable in her sort of history of interior design. Margaret was actually a very highly respected interior designer. I mean, her home was much photographed, and in fact, her house had previously belonged to her parents and had been decorated by an amazing decorator, Siri Morn, and it had one of these all white interiors, which she had changed a bit, but it was a very pale palette. And I think initially, Anne, the director, wanted to have quite a pastel-y sort of 50s color palette. But once we had the DOP on board and we were started to do tests, it wasn't going to be right for the mood. I mean, the mood of this, it's definitely quite a dark piece. And the character of Margaret just emerged as something being very steely. And I think we used that kind of bluey, cold steel palette to represent Margaret. And I think, from finding her car, which was that rather amazing sort of gunmetal bluey car, which was it was like her tank. It was, that was her battle bus. And reflecting that in the colours of her house, I think that was something we developed with the DOP and Anne as well. But we also wanted to contrast the London house as being something very sophisticated with that sort of palette and the sort of shiny reflective materials in it, with the castle, which was much more about, sort of a rugged connection with the landscape and a warmer palette and a more of a sort of natural palette. So we had lots of more kind of browny colours and sort of ochre colours in the castle. So it was about contrast. So there are obviously Margaret touches because she restored the castle, as you can see in those blinds.
Well, Anne was very clear as well that she wanted tone on tone. That seemed to be a mantra for her vision as well. So it meant, from a decorating point of view, that you tied in with that tone, particularly in London, and also actually Margaret's favourite colour was green, even though Ciri Morn had decorated that house in a sort of cream colour. And she was voted the most stylish, one of the 10 most stylish women year upon year in the world. So when she was, in the 30s and 40s, she was the ultimate it girl. But she did have great style. So it was lovely to pick out, items to furnish that house. And the bathroom was a lovely thing to do. I did actually find a reference earlier, but Ciri Morn did this incredible bathroom with this reflected mirrors, which Christina used. What was it made out of? It was
made of a kind of plexiglass, and I think we have quite a lot of the key scenes, which we won't go into the spoiler alert, take place in the bathroom. And I think having this sort of fragmented way of looking at the characters who sort of exist in the same space but they're never really together was actually a perfect sort of visual device for storytelling there. And Philippa found the fantastic rather arsenic coloured green bathroom suite, which was really great for that interior. But we had to make all the mirrors so that they could pivot a bit, so we could hide the camera and get the imagery exactly correct.
I really enjoyed the camera work featuring, thank goodness, lovely wides of the sets, and then moves into close shots with the excellent acting, expressive faces, all their arguments and betrayals and all that kind of thing. Philippa, I'm sure that you must have had conversations about the excellent lighting fixtures that you provided and lampshades. Can you discuss that?
Yes, it seems now there's a lot of demand from the art department to brief them on lighting. So you always have to have too many lamps almost. But lighting is something I love. I mean, the 50s elegant lighting, it was all, they all had to tie in tonally. So they were greens and blues and sort of caramels. Lighting always does make a room look elegant. You can get lighting very wrong. The standby art director really has to sort of put in lamps and take them out as the DOP instructs them.
It's been interesting over the recent years that the sort of cameras are now so sensitive. But actually, quite a lot of the time, it just feels like the sets are lit by practical lights, and there's not very much other lighting, film lighting added into it. And certainly, the moodiness of this piece does come a lot from the use of practical lights with these characteristic sort of soft shades that Philippa's chosen so beautifully. And I think it's increasing, that you have to think about all of the lights that you provide, because they may well be the only light source in the set. So it's happened, increasingly on jobs, but I think it was certainly the case on this job that they were very well used.
They were, and the generator was quite difficult for the interior of the boarding school location. And so there was quite a few problems with lights not going on.
Speaking of lighting, one of the things that I really noticed in quite a few of the environments was the drapery. And I know that some of your photographs have come from your drapes master, because there was a great use of light coming through the windows. And was that just a happy stance, or was that all planned in advance with these beautiful Austrian shades? And there was various sets with lovely window shades and things like that.
Well as a sort of artistic, stylistic look, which obviously we wanted that lovely soft hue that those Austrian blinds give, they needed to block. So they had to be not dense as such, because that would have stopped the light, but there had to be quite a few layers which was why our drapes people were so wonderful, because that was a lot of man hours putting those together. But the drapes also, I mean, our budget didn't stretch to actually. We made the swags and the tails, but we did have to match it to what we could find to hire, and we're fortunate enough. We're so lucky to have fantastic hire houses. They had to adapt them and so forth, and make them slightly grander with the fringing, but we didn't have the budget to make. I think it was 8 windows downstairs for the dining room and drawing room.
Most of the interiors were around the periphery of London, so they were in sort of countryside locations, and it was a pretty soulless Georgian house which had everything stripped out of it. So we had to sort of add things architecturally to it and create the bathroom, but there wasn't very much. It had a wonderful staircase, which is what attracted us to it, and that was a sort of leitmotif in the script, and about Margaret's sort of ascent and descent. It was very important, but otherwise the house was rather soulless. So I think when you see this very, very rich interiors, they're really entirely created by Philippa's team, with obviously the colour added by the art department. And I think the thing about these the Austrian blinds, which became the sort of visual theme of the film, I suppose, because it did give it immediately the right period feel, but it also made it feel quite kind of sumptuous and sexy, which was a part of the story. Although Margaret is a very steely, cold character, she's also quite a sexy woman, and I think they do give it a sort of rather lovely peachy glow, in contrast to the sort of stiffness of the aristocratic characters that you see in there.
Yeah, I think that's well put. She certainly expresses her love of great sex, which was just fabulous for somebody of that time period, just to be so open about it. Tell us more, Christina, if you could, about the team that you worked with, your art directors and your key people.
Yes, we had a very small team. I mean, fortunately, just as knowing Philippa well, because we had to hit the ground running, and I worked with Ian White, who's an art director, brilliant art director, incredibly sort of practical, and he's we're a good team, I think, who I've known for many years, and we've worked together a lot. So he came on board. And again, I had some people that joined me from my previous job, which was a Roman era, very, very different kind of project called Britannia, which was totally different. But some of the art department came onto this, so we had to be find people that were able to do lots of different things. So the art director, Ian, was the supervising art director. The art director, Ros, was initially trained as a graphic designer, and she could oversee all of the graphics. We had a lovely graphics team, but they weren't super experienced. So I think we needed Ros to sort of corral it all, because that was a huge part of the storytelling. Really, was all of the newspapers and the diaries and all of these things. So Ros was able to look after that, as well as handling lots of the locations. Yes, and then again, the drapes team, they'd worked on Britannia, and we knew them from that. We didn't have the time or the resources to build sets from scratch, so we had to be, we had a small construction team who I've worked with before, who were wonderful, lovely, and very accommodating, so they could cope with turning up at a location like the boarding school with no power and no prop men, and actually muck in and help to fix the curtain poles and things until we've got a replacement crew in. So yeah, I think it's having fun. They're really nice people to work with. So I think despite the stresses of the job, I think we all really enjoyed it as well. It's a really, really lovely group of people.
Annie Gilhooly was our buyer, and then a lovely girl called Grace Lee Bahari took over from her, because she had to go on to another project. So between them, they were a great sort of buying team. And Annie's worked on the Game of Thrones with Christina, so she's been she's been doing it for many years, and likes to work on period films as well, which is, so she was a fantastic asset. And also, you have to have laughter when you're doing these projects, and so there's always a lot of laughter with Annie, which is welcome. But they were a great team.
One thing that's a little bit different about the system in London, having worked there myself, is that the prop master not only helps with all the props, but the hand props, but also is the head of the dressing team. Is that correct? Is that how you work?
Usually, yes, that is right. But the English system is very different from the American system. So all the action props, what the actors hold, they're not in charge of. They are becoming more so now. We're veering towards the American system more, particularly because Netflix and there's a lot of American productions happening. But actually, the English system is that we do all the props. So there weren't many makes for this. There were the armor. They did actually they did take on the armor, because the armory was a huge element of those baronial Scottish castles, and that is expensive to do as well. So they did orchestrate overseeing the make of some of that, actually, and put that together. I mean,
you did a great deal of these, taxidermy and horns and all that stuff. How did you go about putting all that together?
Well, with the taxidermy was easier because we could build it a bit like Lego. They had to be secured, but the antlers, hanging everything wasn't easy, because it had to be constructed. There had to be frames for catgut to hang. They couldn't go into the walls because it was all stone, and so that was a challenge.
So here we're seeing the castle as it's transitioned from a pile of rocks, to the renovated and redecorated beauty that it became, thanks to Margaret's money and taste. And we eventually see it in its fabulous opening party in 1953. And then we go and we see all the different bits of it. We see the library and the bedroom and the dining room with the expansive lonely table and the grand staircase. So making that transition from the old version to the new, Philippa, how did that go?
This was a big dress that we're looking at now, which was Ian's study, Niall's before, the 10th Duke, and he didn't want it touched, and it was sacrosanct. This was his shed as such, and Margaret really wasn't really allowed into it. Certainly there's that line when she wants to get rid of the paperwork and he bites at her, saying, you wouldn't, you're just used to giving dinner parties, that you wouldn't understand any academic work. So this was his place, and it remained so. So we didn't actually have to change this, but it was the hall and the stairway and the bedroom that we had to change over the weekend, and preparing for the party. So it was hanging everything, and yeah, we did it. It was a 2-day dress, basically.
And the challenges of working with these grand homes, stately homes, of course, is that you really can't make a hole in a wall and all that. And there's just an enormous responsibility of rigging and taking, care of these environments. That's very challenging.
Yes, but you have to respect that, and you work with it, and you use hooks that are existing, and hope that the layout, the plan of the paintings that you manage to get, that works. And sadly, film is becoming more restrictive because you have clearance. So hanging anything now, there are always fees involved. Yes, what we're looking at now is the Grand Hall. This was painted by our good friend, the brilliant painter, Thomasina Smith. And so she painted this in 3 various stages. This is the final stage, because this is the opening of the party. And And what is hanging there, in fact, that tapestry belongs to Argyle, but we had to take down most of their paintings because they were all by famous artists, and the owners don't want them damaged, quite rightly. You know, when lighting equipment and everything comes in, the circus arrives, and it's quite overwhelming for the owners.
Was that also true for their furnishings in Argyle, where they all had to be cleared away?
Yes, we did remove all their furniture in that drawing room and brought our own. The owner, he was incredibly accommodating, and came from the arts himself. He was an architect, and his parents were involved with the Glasgow Opera, so they had a very sympathetic approach to us and were very welcoming and accommodating, much more so than normally happens. So actually, it was a joy working there, and it was such a beautiful setting.
Christina, did you open with the Scotland sets, with the Scotland location?
Yes, we did actually, which was, I mean, I think as Philippa said, it was challenging because it was so far away and it was immediately after the Easter holiday. But in some ways, I think for the crew, I think it immediately put everybody in the place of the film. So, and certainly it was amazing to be in Scotland in this incredible weather, unexpectedly good weather at the start of the shoot. I have very fond memories of being in that castle for the beginning of the shoot. It was an amazing experience.
Philippa, what was it like making that lovely party and the lawn and the grand salon?
Which we never saw. I had this fantastic reference from 1950s garden party. I think it was sort of Mentmore or somewhere, from Rothschild House. And funnily enough, the Althrops, the Spencers, Diana's parents' engagement party. So I had all this wonderful sort of reference. And you see the guy rope.
That's pretty much it. We had an amazing home economist who'd made the most beautiful period canapes. They were so gorgeous.
He was wonderful. Philippe, yes, yeah. He was French living in Glasgow, and he even bought Margaret Argyle's recipe books. She wrote a book about dining and the etiquette and what she served, and he embraced it, which doesn't happen always. I mean, home economists, they're all brilliant, but this man was fantastic. He was so excited and loved it. And many of the hors d'oeuvres were from her book.
And then no one actually.
You don't see these shots in the finished piece. You don't see
it at all, except for the guy rope.
You mentioned Margaret's car, which was described as is it a Bentley?
It's actually a Daimler, I think. Yes, it's
a Daimler.
Yeah.
Because you had a lot of important transportation. You had the boat train, and you had this amazing car. I loved. There was an important party where they go, and of course Ian gets completely drunk and takes her car and her driver, and Margaret's just horrified because that's as you said, that's her sanctuary, that's her tank, that's her tool, the tray, isn't it? Getting in and out of all the exciting places that she goes.
Yes, I mean, well, we didn't have a lot of money on this production, so I'm thrilled that it looks so classy. But Ian, the supervising art director, Ian White, he was brilliant with sourcing the vehicles, especially sourcing a 1950s period speedboat, which we managed to get to our remote location in Scotland, which was excellent, and it looked so beautiful. So yes, and I mean trains, we had to travel to get the train because there are a certain number of them in different parts of the country, but it was a special journey to Sussex to get that train. But yeah, it looked beautiful, and we found that they had exactly the right palette for us. We struggled to get the Daimler, but in the end I had to persuade the Action Vehicles company to buy the Daimler for us because I'd found it online, and I hope they sold it afterwards because it was so key. I just needed to be special, and that color was perfect.
And you here at this castle also, you must have had some sort of greens group. to create those old vines and all that kind of thing. Was that an important part for you guys?
Yes, it was. I mean, I think in the original script, as I said, that the script that we inherited or had from the writer described in quite a lot of detail about how dilapidated the castle was. It was overgrown, it was burnt, some of the turrets were falling down, it was burnt out. But in fact, Anne didn't really, I think she felt that she could tell that story without it needing to be so gothic. So we did have to pare it back a bit, but we have a very good greens team from Palm Brokers who are good friends, and I've worked with them a lot, especially on Game of Thrones. And I knew that they'd be able to do it. So they did come up, and we spent, you know, a good few days before the crew arrived creating the overgrown porch and other bits around the exterior. And then they also had all of the beautiful geraniums and the flowers to then put in to make the finished castle, especially for the party, and all of the floral decoration around the windows to give it that sort of lovely period feeling of an English summer with roses. So they were excellent. Yeah, I mean, we didn't need them in that many locations, but they did a lot at this castle. Yeah.
There were many other sets that were just fabulous. Lady Maureen Dufferin, I guess her name was, with her penis party and her salon where she and Margaret have pedicures and talk about bonobos having sex. That was fabulous. Where was that one shot?
Great scene. That was at West Wickham, wasn't it? Which is Buckinghamshire, outside of London. And I mean, in terms of dressing and preparing that was more contained, because you just take items out that are very precious, but the main structure of it is all there. So, you know, we were lucky. We just had to create the mess for Anne for that dinner, for the penis place. In fact, Anne had the brilliant idea, because originally Sarah Phelps had scripted it as one little wind-up silver penis. And it was genius. She said, it's got to be like Wacky Races, you know, let's have a race. So all these little things, it worked. It made it much funnier.
It was very funny.
It was brilliant.
We didn't expect that, but fortunately we'd obviously made quite a few in case it broke. But I think that location was actually, I mean, it was supposed to be in a London society house, but I think because that house was actually built for a very eccentric character, and it seemed exactly right for this kind of decadent party and the character of Lady Maureen. So I think, you know, it's a location that is used quite frequently, but I don't think it's not a generic place at all. It has quite idiosyncratic color scheme and decor, which is very lavish, and I thought it worked really well for this character and that party scene. And then again we had the funny scenes of the bonobos, where it's instead of they were supposed to go into a beauty salon, but we thought actually rather than go to another place and dress that, they're so grand, these people, that they would have had people that came to their house. So, and it gave us another day to shoot in this wonderful environment and see a bit more of it. So Philippa found these great kind of, you know, more 50s looking props for the manicurists and the chairs, but you had that within the context of a very grand 18th century room, which I loved. I thought it worked really well.
And actually, I just want to add, when you do research for a film, particularly if it's period, Margaret was friends, because she started her life in New York. She was very American, you know, she had a lot of friends in America, and Elizabeth Arden was a really good friend, and used to make her lipsticks for her. They were bespoke. So we got Arden to give us their archive, so we could use all their amazing 1950s, particularly in the bathroom. So we were able to use all that and use it for the manicure scene as well. So that's a nice element to films when you get people on board, you know, who help with the authenticity. So it was great. And, you know, she was friends with Barbara Wootton and that whole sort of crowd. So it was it was a nice element to be able to involve.
The movie travels to France a couple of times, and there's that wonderful villa in Biarritz where Wee Wee is ensconced.
Oh, I'm so glad you appreciated that, because of course we couldn't travel anywhere outside of the M25 apart from our little foray into Scotland. So I happened to came across this place on it was in northwest London, and it was in a very, very suburban part of northwest London, and it was just an amazing house. That the person who built it quite recently, within the last 20 years, was obsessed with France, and he'd had a house in France, and then his wife refused to travel anymore, so he built a French chateau in where was it? It was Pinner or somewhere like that. So it was a very unlikely and very eccentric place, but I just thought it would be great because it looks so different. And Philippa obviously brought in most of the dressing, and again we did have our greens team to create a sense of a south of France garden outside and bougainvillea. But the building itself, which had an amazing staircase and these rather lovely bright pastel coloured walls and lots of yellow in it, I thought it was great. So yeah, Philippa, what did you think?
No, it was fantastic. I mean, you couldn't imagine that, it was in London. There were certain locations that you use for France always, but they've now been turned into hotels, or it's much harder to find. So it was a fantastic asset to the film.
You also went to Margaret's father's house, in this sort of more dark and forbidding place. Where was that shot?
Well, it wasn't actually his house. He lived in a hotel, so it was supposed to be the Dorchester Hotel. So we actually shot that in two different places. We shot the foyer and the lobby of that in an incredible Art Deco hotel in London, which I think there were some benefits to shooting in lockdown, which was that as long as you weren't in the streets, you could be inside. You could get into places like these incredible hotels and lots of the bars that we went to, which would normally be off limits or too expensive for our sort of project. And then the interiors were actually the strange building where we were shooting Margaret's house. It was a hybrid. It had a Georgian bit, and then it had some later additions and even had some modern bits. So we were able to use a number of different rooms for different other places in the film. So that was shot there.
The clubs and restaurants were obviously a very important plot point because, there's lots of drinking, lots of partying, and lots of gallivanting and all that kind of thing. You must have used quite a number of them. And my question to you, Philippa, is did you have to dress them, or were they at all ready to go?
They're never ready to go, but not when you're doing a period feature, but there were a few that were ready to go because Anne wanted that sort of a modern feel for this drinking bar nightclub. But we just have to sort of bring in the lights and the small dressing.
All the glasses
Yes, but the costume and the extras also sort of fill the space and so forth. So it is it's more the smalls and the flowers and all that kind of thing.
So once again, lighting with practicals, especially in these enclosed spaces, becomes a huge deal.
Yes, it does.
And you mentioned the costuming. The costuming was gorgeous. You had tell us a little bit about working with the costume designer, Christina. Did you know her from before?
Ian Fulcher. I hadn't worked with him before. He was great. I think we were really in sync with the costumes and the sets, and in that we would obviously exchange photographs. I think, for example, like the Biarritz house, he would send me pictures and said, "I'm thinking of putting them in these," and I said, "Oh, that's great because actually there's an awful lot of yellow here." And so he definitely was very keen to collaborate, but like ourselves, he didn't really have very much time, and we didn't physically hang out together very much because we weren't in the same place very often. So it was, but yeah, he was very keen on trying to share as much as we could. So certainly, for example, we had a lot of discussion at the beginning about what Margaret was going to be wearing in the portrait, because he had started we wanted to copy the actual portrait that existed there, which is this incredible yellow dress, and we were he was about to start making that dress when there were issues about the copyright of the painting if she was in such a similar pose. So we had to change it all quite a lot in the end for that reason. But yeah, I think it worked really well, but inevitably a lot of it is down to luck, because there isn't the time that you'd like to have to go through every detail. But I think we had our color palettes worked out.
And Philippa, that must have been something, obviously, it was always for set decoration, trying to make sure that the character doesn't disappear into the walls. And yet you have this directive from Anne, the director, is tone on tone in her home. So blues on blues and things like that.
Yes, and the pastel colors that she wanted, she was very keen on pale pink, but, for skin tone and for camera, that's difficult. So that, as Christina was mentioning before, we did veer away from that. But tonally it worked, and with costume it was a very nice collaboration, actually. They were a very nice team.
Well, I just want to thank you both for being with us today. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Christina Moore, production designer, and Philippa Hart, our fabulous set decorator. I just also want to thank Prime Video Limited Series for their support in making this possible, and to our team at Inside the Set and Set Decor. I've loved this conversation. Thank you for being with us. Wish you all the best with the project you're embroiled in now, and we hope to see you again at some point.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Rosemary.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.